The irony of our strategy, and sometimes our own investors and LPs have a hard time thinking through, am I going to put my philanthropic dollars here or my highest ROI dollars to diversify my portfolio? And for us, we think that this strategy will not have concessionary returns, that it'll actually be an accelerant for outperforming in the industry. And so I wouldn't say that we are bowing out of opportunities that we think are going to return the most capital. What I will say is that we are magnetized and feel drawn to opportunities where founders are bringing just as much intensity to how they think about rest and protecting their founder outcome as they do the business itself. As I reflect on founders who fit our profile, while also considering founders who have taken the traditional venture growth approach, I think intensity and sober-mindedness are the two traits that are always present with founders who are, quote, successful from a financial and monetary standpoint. And so these are people who are thoughtful about their yeses and nos, are really aware of them. And for the things that they say yes to, they are intense about delivering on it.
Hello and welcome to Funded, a series where we pull back the curtain on venture capital fundraising from both sides of the table. My name is Alex Wittenberg from Air CFO, and we are on a mission to demystify the fundraise process for founders everywhere. The series dives deep into the tactics and strategies that actually work for closing funding rounds, practical insights that you can apply immediately within your raise. We'll be hosting candid conversations with two groups of folks. First, successful founders who unpack their fundraising journeys in detail, and second, active VCs like our guest today, who will help us understand how VCs evaluate opportunities, what founder approaches can help you stand out in your fundraise process, and how decisions get made inside of VC firms. Our goal with this series is to share lessons and create a comprehensive playbook that helps founders and investors have more productive conversations and facilitate the efficient flow of capital between the two parties. So today I am super excited to welcome Kristina Chapple, the general partner at 11 Tribes Ventures, an early stage fund with a unique approach to investing in founder resilience. Kristina and her team are disrupting and reforming the traditional growth at all costs venture model by investing in entrepreneurs' well-being, putting dollars into founders' mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Kristina has joined 11 Tribes as their first hire and has helped deploy their initial fund while supporting their recently announced $40 million Fund 2. She's led investments in companies like Alloy Market, Legal Karma, Go Nanas, Nutrad, and several others. She's recognized as Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2024 for venture capital and also on Chicago Innovation's 25 Under 25 list. Kristina, I'm really excited to dive in to hear your perspective on what makes founders stand out and how 11 Tribes approaches the investment process. So thank you so much for taking the time.
It's an honor to be here, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I just kind of gave an overview of your background. So I'd love to start by talking about 11 Tribes' investment thesis, which I know is quite different from the thesis that many of the other VCs that we've spoken with would put up as the way that they approach investing. So when you speak to a founder for the first time, how do you describe what 11 Tribes stands for and how you all are different from some of the other firms in your industry?
There is a literal sea of emerging managers out there today. So how I describe why we exist is in this idea that for the last 70 or so years, since venture capital has even been an asset class to invest in, investors have focused on entirely one part of the exit conversation, which is the business outcome. And of course, as a steward of capital, I want strong business outcomes for every person I have the privilege of meeting. And typically, it's fairly straightforward on how to measure those with things like exit valuations, ARR, cash flow, the like. And those are good things. But 11 Tribes exists to shed light to a part of the conversation that we think is actually more central to whether or not a company exits. And that's what we call the founder outcome. And you know, measuring it is a bit harder. How our team thinks about it and holds ourselves accountable to it is, what's the state of the founder's most precious relationships when they walk away from their company? If they're married, are they still together with that spouse? If they have children, do their kids know them and talk to them? Is there any peace in that founder's life? What's their health like? Physical, mental, spiritual health? You know, our team, we've all had experiences building organizations on day zero. Only one of us, Mark, the managing partner, has built a venture backable company. But our entire team has taken what we have coined as this downward journey of entrepreneurship, where along the way, each of us had some piece of our own founder outcome fracture. And it was sobering. It woke us up. And it forced us to grapple with this thought that if I'm sacrificing the things in life that, if we're honest, like make it most worth living, like relationships and health, not only am I missing out on this core human experience, but also I'm putting existential risk and threat on the organization that I'm bringing into the world, reaching the full vision that I've set out for it, whether that be, 5, 8, 10 years down the road. And so for us as a firm, acknowledging our role as a VC investor, we have tried to bring as much imagination to what does it look like to bring strategy, resources, and care to our people as they build and as they eventually walk from their company, as we do the business itself. And our belief is if we can deliver on that well, then the financial outcomes in our portfolio will only be strengthened.
I love that. How does your investment thesis impact the types of companies that you ultimately invest in? Would you say that you have a unique framework for evaluating startups, um, keeping in mind the ultimate goals of the firm being not just financial success, but also like holistic well-being? Do you feel like you might turn away companies that you would potentially invest in if you were purely viewing the opportunity through a financial lens?
The irony of our strategy, and sometimes our own investors and LPs have a hard time thinking through, am I going to put my philanthropic dollars here or my highest ROI dollars to diversify my portfolio? And for us, we think that this strategy will not have concessionary returns, that it'll actually be an accelerant for outperforming in the industry. And so I wouldn't say that we are bowing out of opportunities that we think are going to return the most capital. What I will say is that we are magnetized and feel drawn to opportunities where founders are bringing just as much intensity to how they think about rest and protecting their founder outcome as they do the business itself. And what that shows us early is that this person is thinking with an endurance mindset and a resilient mindset. And there's a humility required as well, knowing that, okay, I'm going to have to, seek outside resources and help. And a part of our thesis is we have an allocation of capital on top of every check that we write that is non-dilutive. So usually we're investing $1 million to $1.5 million at one of the first rounds of institutional capital. And in agreement with our LP base, we invest another 2%. So typically $20,000 to $30,000 for that founder to invest in their own resilience. And so that 20 to 30K is being put to work in initiatives like therapy or coaching or co-founder health coaches, financial planners, community memberships. I mean, we just added a marriage counselor to our resilience menu for founders to tap into as suggested resources. It's amazing to see the thirst for it and the receptivity of it from our founders in our portfolio. And like that is the why, this claim to, be committed to business plus founder outcomes. But a bit of the how, I think that that's important as well. Our investment mandate, we are looking for founders who have spent sometimes decades within their industry and have been haunted by a problem that they waited for someone to do something about. And yet, after the years have passed and their savings have accumulated, they're like, you know what? Why not me? Is there anyone in the world who knows this problem more intimately than I do? This is something worthy of failing at, and I'm the person to step into the gap and mediate it. I'm listening for that story of founder market fit. And then the other pieces of our thesis are we are looking for founders that are not located in the traditional venture hubs that you think of, like New York and San Francisco. We're looking for people who are building in sort of these tier 2 and 3 markets, places like Cincinnati and Chicago and Atlanta, Omaha, Nebraska. Mostly because we find that the founders there are more oriented towards capital efficiency and not putting themselves on the growth at all costs VC treadmill. And then the final piece is finding companies that are post revenue. So these people have proven that they have a product that people are willing to pay for. They have a critical mass of paying customers. And most of the companies that we bring into diligence are doing about $1 million in revenue. So those component pieces of the thesis are what I am considering as I am screening a founder and an opportunity. But at the end of the day, if the founder is unwilling to consider their own founder outcome and have made their life entirely their company, and it's clear that their identity is also wrapped up in it, that's not an investment that we can make because of the piece around endurance.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that reframe as this approach being an accelerant for startup success. A lot of the best founders that I know are very self-development oriented and are viewing their startup journey as a an exercise in self-improvement. And I think I mean, you learn so much about yourself building a company. And I think it's really great that 11 Tribes recognizes that and actually puts resources behind a founder's ability to work on that side of themselves while they are working so hard to also like bring this vision that they have into the world. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Our belief is the founder is the most valuable asset the company has. I don't care who is a customer, what patents they have. 11 Tribes invests in founder-led companies. And we believe that especially at this stage of business, as that founder goes, so does the company. And so as many resources as we can bring around our people to support them in, being able to wake up on a Friday morning and run in the way that their company is going to require of them if they're going to achieve the vision they've set out for themselves. We want to do that. And we think that's the highest ROI spend that we can make as a fund.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak for a minute on the profile of startup that you are looking to invest in terms of stage and what sort of checks you are looking to write with your newly announced fund two?
Yes. This might be a surprise. We are looking for founders who are generally skeptical and a bit cynical towards venture capital as a category for investment. Many of the teams that we meet and have backed would have otherwise bootstrapped their company. And they have peers who have seen, who have taken venture money and have had an otherwise great business driven into the ground because of unrealistic growth expectations. This is the world that we are living in today. And given the state of technology and how many teams can serve a vast array of customers with relatively low headcount. This is a founder's world. And we want to partner with people who are going to be extremely thoughtful, extremely conservative in how much capital they raise over the life of their business. And most of the companies that we are bringing into diligence are falling in the revenue threshold of 500K to 3 million. And the money that they take from us, this is the first time that they have created a data room, the first institutional partner that they have, had extended discussions with, probably given reference calls to. And so it's relatively early in their journey, but still a little bit further along from a revenue perspective.
And does 11 Tribes typically prefer to be the lead investor? Do you co-invest as a policy? And I guess another question that I have is, when you are co-investing with VCs, does the stance that y'all take around investing in the whole person, does that in any way like impact the dynamics between yourselves and some of the other investors on the cap table?
Alex, you mentioned that we just closed our second fund. And one question that we fielded from our investors is, what have you learned from fund one to fund two? And this is the biggest learning that we've had, in that if we can write larger checks and take up a larger percent of the round that founder is raising, and then if it makes sense, occupy a board seat and have a governance position, given that our thesis is in opposition to other venture funds, we want to be able to have that influence and have that voice on behalf of the founder, as they're thinking through approving budgets and whether or not they bring in further capital and making key hires and the like. And so we do lead rounds. We can co-lead. There have been instances where we've followed a lead investor who is aligned with us from a values perspective and outcomes. The other important detail is we are looking to back founders who are aiming for an exit in the $75 to $300 million enterprise value at exit range. We do not underwrite our portfolio on the back of one founder. The beauty of equity is we have the uncapped upside. Some of our teams, we believe, could be billion-dollar businesses. And hello, if they reach that day, we are celebrating with them. But that is not the outcome that we are imposing on our teams or nudging them towards. We are hoping that our teams grow great companies, serve a robust set of customers, and exit to some strategic buyer, some point 5 to 10 years in their founder journey.
Interesting. Based on the investments that you made in Fund One, have you seen the math kind of play out in that way, and that you maybe have a more well-rounded portfolio than a traditional VC fund would, from the standpoint of, instead of a small number of like superstar companies driving 90+% of the returns, you have a little bit more of maybe a slower burn, but a larger cohort of companies that are going to give you those, or that are trending towards those valuations and exits in the $50 to $100 million range?
Right. Fund one we had companies all across the gamut. And, one of our companies hit 9 figures of revenue in a few years post our investment. And so it's not impossible. And we've seen that hockey stick venture growth. And it's tremendous. And we're celebrating with our teams then. But for Fund Two, we have tried to take a page from the private equity playbook. and apply this lower volatility, slightly more conservative investment approach into early stage technology companies. And it requires us to have a higher success rate, to have, 40 to 60% of our portfolio land in the 3x to 10x range of our investment. If we're, investing in a 10 million post, we want to see that company become $100 million enterprise value at exit company. And that would be a 10x for our fund and a meaningful distribution day for our investor base. But it does require for more of our founders to have wins. And that's something I am personally really proud of, in that we have structured Fund 2 in a way that is more aligned with our teams, acknowledging that they have one company. I have a portfolio of 30 or 35. My founder has one and they are like giving it all to that one. And so if we can be partners that are able to bring attention and care to more of our portfolio, as opposed to it just being sifted pretty quickly to the highest winners, that's just another element of reforming in this industry of venture that our team is trying to lean into.
Yeah, I really appreciate that approach because many VCs are, I mean, to their credit, they are very transparent about the math behind their portfolio construction, but they will say up front, we expect 50+% of the investments that we make to ultimately go to zero. And for us, that's just part of the game. Could you speak for a bit about what you see as, or what you see as being a couple of the shortcomings of the traditional venture capital model, and how 11 Tribes is trying to reform that in a way and rerun the numbers in a different way that's a little bit more equitable and sustainable for all of the founders involved?
Hmm. There's so much to unpack there. And, we are a relatively small fish. We've been around for 4 years. We wrote our first check back in April of 21. So I certainly don't feel like the sage expert quite yet, but we are learning more and more every day. Um, One piece of venture that we have tried to reinvent is the initial call and the first impression that you have when meeting a founder, and trying to bring a radically relational flavor to that 30-minute moment. And so I kid you not, 25 minutes of a 30-minute initial call, meandering through the founder's personal life story, where they grew up, what they love, if their friends are texting them that something reminded them of that founder, what is that thing? And trying to unearth, who is this beautiful person that is sitting across the table, this virtual table from me? How in the world have they ended up in this seat? Not taking a path of least resistance and giving their yes to something, knowing that it's going to come at a great cost to them, whether it be financially or relationally or physically. Like, it takes such a toll. And so we spend so much time and the finite resources that we have really trying to understand, who is this person? Why have they arrived here? And it's amazing the level of information that is shared with us earlier in diligence that helps us understand, is this a company and opportunity that we need to spend more time with, that we would be a good capital partner for? Or do we kindly pass and funnel that opportunity to another capital partner? And so one of the pieces that I think VC has just missed on, or has thought about later, but is hard to return to, is relationship and what that looks like. Um, if someone leads thinking of another human being as a financial asset, it's hard to remove that and then like be relational and meet face to face, human to human. And so we try to lead with that, also acknowledging the industry that we're in and, everybody involved in our orbit, our investors, our co-investors, our founders, the like. But I think so much of where the industry is missing goes back to that root of relationships.
Yeah, it sounds like the initial conversations that you have with your founders are quite different from the I'm trying to even put the words together. When a founder is going through the initial round of calls, they're typically lining up calls back to back to back. And I imagine that many of those calls look very similar. But yours seems like it's a bit of a pattern interrupt, which is probably it probably helps you to identify the founders that would be a great fit for you because you're throwing them off of their getting them out of their kind of talk tracks, like and making them actually approach the conversation from a more like emotion-centered angle or a heart-centered angle. So yeah, that's really interesting.
And it can be burdensome to the founder, like they're already so strung and they're like, let me just get through this next initial call, see if the business is interesting for this investor party. And when I ask these questions of like, who are you? Like, I'm interested in getting to know you. Like, it takes effort to show up. And, and not every founder meets me there. And, I don't even fault them for that necessarily. I sort of fault the broader industry for turning a man into a machine. And like, what a loss that is. But for the teams that can, meet me where I am and allow themselves to be seen by someone that they don't know, but that they could have like a pretty intimate relationship with at some point, should we choose to do the investment. Man, so much of our process comes back to that initial call and the trust built there and what we're able to learn.
What would you say is the single biggest trait that you look for within those initial calls as the highest positive predictor of success as you define it?
So the trait that I look for in an initial call is actually different than what trait I think is possessed by the founders who are the most successful. Though I don't think they're totally mutually exclusive. What I am looking for in an initial call is humility. And is this a person who is going to pose as if they have all the answers all the time? Or is this person also going to acknowledge that they're going to need support along the way? And that, while they've stepped into this gap, there's also a lot that they still have yet to learn. Of course. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. That's terrifying for teams who are able to acknowledge that and say like, hey, the 20 to 30K that you have set aside that I can spend on coaching, like, yeah, hiring, I would really love to have some best practices there to speak to an expert about that. So that is the trait that I look for in the initial. As I reflect on, founders who fit our profile while also considering founders who have taken the traditional venture growth approach, I think intensity and sober-mindedness are the two traits that are always present with founders who are, quote, successful from a financial and monetary standpoint. And so these are people who are thoughtful about their yeses and nos, are really aware of them. And for the things that they say yes to, they are intense about delivering on it. And so if a founder is going to wake up, at 6 a.m. and work out for an hour, maybe meditate and eat breakfast and regroup for an hour, like the discipline and intensity required to even protect those things as opposed to just getting on email, like intensity is present there. But then the hours that they do spend, like, all right, I am at my laptop or in meetings with customers from 8 to 8. Like they are fully there. And so that's one trait. And then the other piece, the sober-mindedness, for teams who are able to have some separation between the growth of their business and, the inherent worth that they believe they have as a human being, like that is the sober-mindedness that we're looking for and that we try to encourage our founders in, every time that we speak to them, reminding them that regardless of if the business is at a peak or in a trough, like them, founder, there is so much more to life and to their story than just like those financial metrics that investors will come back to. And so the most successful founders, I also think, have this healthy separation of understanding like the business to some degree is out of their control and they, are committed to the problem, but at the same time recognize like, you know what? I might not even be here. I might not even be the person who's going to like bring this company through to the very final day. But I've found that those teams that bring that level of humility and intensity and sober-mindedness are the people who are the founder operator, even post IPO.
I heard a quote recently that really resonated with me, reflecting on my own journey building your CFO, but I think applies to VC-backed startups especially, which is building a startup is a personal development exercise masquerading as a money-making opportunity. Because I think that building a company has a funny way of shining a spotlight on all of the areas that an individual, a leader, might be coming up a little bit short, or just might be like the areas where they need to improve. And so I and I think sober-mindedness is one of those things that you kind of need to hone over time through exposure to those situations where you need to be able to create a little bit of separation and avoid kind of going off the handle or like making an emotionally charged decision versus evaluating something with a clear mind. And so I mean, I think that the fact that you pitch that as one of the areas where you can kind of help founders improve, it has to improve your portfolio company's chances of success in the long term, I would think.
Thank you. And, given that we do occupy many board seats in our Fund 2 portfolio, even as we field projections from teams, I'm thinking of one founder who came to us recently looking to bring on some more capital. And as they articulated, here's what we expect to do in 5 years. And, up until this point, been growing 150% year over year. And what they were forecasting at that point was, like 30% growth. And we encouraged them to be slightly less conservative in what they think is possible for their business. And how they responded was, these are the numbers I want to be held accountable to. And if I don't meet these numbers 5 years from now, I am a failure. Like it is reflective of me as the leader of this organization. And so this topic of identity even surfaces there in building out 5-year projections. And rarely are we ever the investor party that's like, oh yeah, you can do more. Like push yourself, like you've got it. But in this case, because of this fear of, letting people down and not doing what you said you were going to do, this fear of, over promising and under delivering, a founder was giving themselves a discount. And, we healthily pushed back against that. And, regardless of what happens in the business, like I want that founder to just know how valuable they are. And it's amazing to see how the business has grown. It's crushing. But even if there's a day where that business is no longer crushing, like failure is not fatal. That's our belief as VC investors.
That's a really great example of how you can add value as a investor partner through helping a founder to um, develop the mental game side of building a startup. So thank you for sharing. Do you have a hard stop here in a couple of minutes, or do you have a few extra? Okay, awesome. Cool. I would love to take a bit of a step back and talk about your process for investing in companies. We talked a little bit about the initial call. I'd like to start even before that and hear from you about what does your process for deciding which companies to take initial calls with, what does that look like? What's the best way for a founder to put themselves onto your radar? And how do you source the majority of the companies that you evaluate for investment? Maybe talking through kind of like what that funnel looks like from initial opportunities that you're looking at all the way through to the number of investments that you end up making in a given year.
My team describes me as the front door of the firm because all initial calls pass through me. And as we think about the pipeline and funnel that we've built, um, there are many, many roads into our pipeline and the companies that we see. There are sort of four main groups that we look to for deal flow. And the first are our current founders and founders that we have passed on, who had a positive experience in our process and want to, bring a friend along, a peer that they admire and respect. That goes a long way for us, any introduction from another founder. And then our second strongest is co-investors. We have hundreds of co-investors that we have warm relationships with. I have communities that I am a member of where we share the most compelling deal that we've seen in the last month with a base of another 100 investors. And so, as you can imagine, in that intimate, tight-knit community, that is one of the most potent sources of deal flow for us. I am often on planes from Chicago trying to get out to different tech weeks and conferences and to share the 11 Tribes thesis there. I meet several founders through that medium and just other ecosystem events. We are trying to plant our flag and be more present and consistent in some of these tier two cities. While also acknowledging our own limitation as humans and investors. And
Sounds
so,
like, yeah, you're hitting the upper limit of the amount of time that you can spend on a plane. You don't have too much
yes,
more
yes,
days that
exactly.
you can spend. Yeah.
Exactly. And then finally are our venture partners. And these are operators in our network who are also investors in our fund, who have started companies in these industries that we invest. And so we tap them through diligence and rely on their expertise heavily. And these people open up customer doors and commercialization opportunities for our current portfolio and for companies that we're in diligence with. And so they are sort of, boots on the ground in their own local ecosystems, and they will pass things our way when they see it fit. And so, when founders are consistent and they show up on LinkedIn and engaging with content, or they find a founder in our portfolio to be the link between our team and them, that's really effective. But the question that I ask myself often is, how many calls can I responsibly take in a week? And one of the maxims that our team has started to share amongst ourselves is, you know, being comfortable with neglect and understanding that there are going to be great opportunities that we legitimately just don't have the bandwidth to bring through our process. And so I think all of us wish that we had more time to show up um, with even greater intentionality in things like pass emails or, even just co-investor calls and sharing deals with that person who, this founder that I met this week that wasn't a fit for us, we could introduce them to them. Like the constraint is time. Um, and so we're trying to level up every day, but that's sort of how we think about our pipeline and meeting teams.
So, as the front door to 11 tribes, how many of these initial calls would you estimate that you take in a given month or year? And then as you think about the different stages of your investment pipeline, what percentage of your companies do you move through to each subsequent stage, ultimately resulting in an investment?
Hmm. Quick math. Uh, I have between 5 and 10 initial calls a week if I'm not a part of some like crazy speed dating investor founder matchmaking um, 2-hour stint. And, you know, that's putting initial calls somewhere in the like 260 to 520 a year. And of those calls, I'd say depends on the season. Um, but if I'm taking 5 calls in a week, a good week is 2 of those calls move to intro to partnership, where the broader 11 tribes team is engaged. And we have 4 voting investment committee members amongst the 4 partners. We try to get everybody present on this call. But after that discussion, when we dig more into just the nuances of the business and the stage of the business, that's when we decide, are we going to enter full diligence with this team? And if so, we need 2 partners to champion that opportunity. And from there, we will create a level 1 investment memo where some pieces like market, customers, team, competition, and exit opportunities, those are all discussed at a relatively high level. And then our investment committee and partnership goes through a voting form based on that level 1 memo, where we rank the business across all of those different categories. We have an entire section dedicated to the founder also and ranking them across humble, hungry, and smart, and how we would say those traits are embodied or not when compared to the other investors or other founders that we have invested in our Fund 2 portfolio. So there are a lot of hurdles in our process. And it's mostly stage of business that ends up being the determining factor of, is this company brought into full diligence with our team now? Or are we going to try and court this founder and team as they continue to bring on customers and see if there's an opportunity to invest, 6 months from now or 12 months from now?
Hmm, got it. Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. Um, at the early stages, obviously, just in general, diligence relies heavily on evaluating the team and the founder. And it sounds like that's doubly true for 11 Tribes' evaluation process. How do you apply a standardized or objective framework? How do you evaluate those factors um, across the hundreds of founders that you're speaking with? You mentioned Teamalytics previously. Could you speak maybe a little bit about how you leverage that to evaluate these different opportunities?
Absolutely. There are tons of workplace aptitude tests on the market. Some investors use them in their diligence to get a better idea of what is the leadership style and what are the competencies of this CEO or co-founder team. Each investment that we have made from Fund 2, or actually this has been implemented more recently, we have shared a Teamalytics survey with the founder and asked the founder to pass this same survey along to 3 to 6 of their team members, where there are 10 pages of this survey, and on each page is just a set of 50 words, 50 adjectives. And people will go through and say, for this founder, calm is true, enthusiastic is true, arrogant is false. You select the words that do apply to that person that they embody. And then a founder's leadership profile is mapped out based on the weighted average of all of those selections. And, for individuals like me who select more adjectives on the survey, that is taken into account as we look at the final product versus someone who's maybe a bit more concise and chooses 10 adjectives for, that leader that they are scoring. But that's been really helpful in understanding what are the strengths of this team and particularly this person, and then where are the opportunities that they can grow. They might have some blind spots, and then being able to speak with the founding team about what we found and get to see their reactions. And also, it's sort of this jumping off point too for our teams to consider working with an executive coach and filling in with some of those blind spots, at least having some language to discuss as they consider, carving out time for their own personal development. But the Teamalytics has been, the same survey that we passed along to teams. The other piece that's been fundamental in our scoring of founders and evaluation through diligence is language from Patrick Lencioni, who is a best-selling author, organizational health guru. He has several incredible books, and one of those books discusses this framework of the ideal team player and them being humble, hungry, and smart. And what happens when all 3 of those qualities are present versus 2. And as we think about our teams and all the conversations that we have with them, all of the touch points over email, we break bread with every founding team before we issue a term sheet to them. That's a huge part of our process, and getting to know this human being. And that is one of the pieces that we're considering of where do they fall on this humble, hungry, and smart matrix.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Teamalytics sounds like something I would love to have my team put together to help me understand a little bit better what my profile would look like. And going back to one of your earlier comments about the trait that you look for in those initial calls being humility, I think that makes a lot of sense, because I would imagine that most of the founders that you speak with are probably very hungry and very smart. But the humble dimension, if I had to guess, is probably the most uncommon among founders. And so that is probably, if I had to imagine, one of the bigger differentiators for you when determining which companies you want to move forward with in the process.
Absolutely. And I think some investors maybe even have painted humility as this weakness, or someone who's not confident, a leader that people wouldn't, run into a fire with. We disagree strongly.
Yeah, I like that. So as you go into the full due diligence process with a startup, what are some of the additional materials that you ask for or additional conversations that you want to have with them when you are making your final go or no go decision about offering up a term sheet?
The strength of a financial model says a lot. And
Yeah.
if we have, 30 minutes with that team, walking through it together, talking through the levers, that is an important step in our diligence process. But the reason why we target founders who are in the 500K to 3 million in revenue range is just how much of an emphasis we have on customer feedback and customer interviews in our diligence process. For one of our teams recently, we spoke to 8 of their customers, and those customers were generous enough. We know that that is the most expensive introduction that a team that we are getting to know in diligence can make, and we are very appreciative of it. We will also speak with other reference calls that have worked with the team previously. We do our own modeling, and since the addition of our associate, we have a much stronger valuation framework as we think about what a company is worth and where is their value. And at this price, are we comfortable enough with, the ownership and the value that we feel like we are also getting to participate in? Um, we spend extensive time on all of those pieces.
Awesome. So for a company that you ultimately decide to invest in and you sign a term sheet with, once you are fully on board as an investor and partner, what does that first 30 to 90 days of your partnership with a startup look like? Um, Both from kind of like a portfolio onboarding standpoint, but as well as I'm curious to hear about the cadence that you like to fall into with a startup, like how often you want to be connecting with them, what sorts of updates are you looking for, all of those kinds of things.
This is currently under construction at 11 Tribes. This is an area that we are building out more thoughtfully at the moment, especially as we think about just the number of checks we will be writing from Fund 2, which will be a lot. Um, we work with our teams to try and start chipping away at their resilience commitment. You know, how are they going to think about putting their 20K or 30K to work in development of themselves as people? Um, and so that's one area that we spend time on. I'd say the other piece is, you know, thinking through our governance structures and board meetings. And so many of our teams do have a formal board, and this often meets on a quarterly basis. Uh, it's rare to have a team that meets in person every quarter, but we get substantial updates from our founders then. And even if a formal board is not established on, the documentation and the terms of the round, we often suggest that our teams do create a mini board, like a board light approach, so that they can start flexing that muscle and just practicing good hygiene as it comes to reporting and talking through strategy. Um, you know, every team is building the ship as they are flying it, but being able to have those baked in moments for reflection is really valuable in just getting pulse checks with our teams. And then, of course, ad hoc, like we make ourselves available to hop on the phone with our founders should something come up. And there always seems to be something going on, whether it is, cleanup required with the cap table or, a higher investing schedule gone wrong, or even strain within a co-founder relationship and what to do. Um, we we are the person for those calls.
Yeah, I really like that concept of a board light exercise at the earlier stages, because I think a lot of founders just try to flip that switch once they have that formal responsibility, but it is a muscle that you need to build up over time. And it's not the hardest thing that a founder has to do in their day to day, but it does require like a commitment and a level of diligence to be able to reliably produce those updates and create that open line of communication with investors. It's one thing that I wish we were able to hammer home more with our portfolio companies, is just like how they can build stronger, more productive relationships with their board, because I feel like maybe this is changing a little bit over time, but I've seen founders view their board as like a relationship that they need to manage from like treating them as like an external party that they need to appease, but like still kind of keep at arm's length. But I think that's such a it's suboptimal way to uh, leverage a really valuable resource that you have at your disposal as a founder who's like fighting an uphill battle. Like your board can be a really powerful way to recruit new hires or find new customers or just act as a sounding board. And so, yeah, building that repeatable process for communicating with your board, I think, is a really important part of that.
One of my closest peers is a Series C founder who's raised $105 million over the course of their business. And they have had countless board meetings at this point. They've been in operation for almost 7 years, and they have never had a board member ask them in a board meeting, "How are you doing?" And so it's so real. And there will be people who say that's not the time and place to, uh, talk about life or how it's going and the like. And I am hesitant to share this because I think it is slightly controversial, and we have not implemented it yet at 11 Tribes. But I'm curious to see if anybody has opinions or thoughts here. But founders do board reporting on a regular basis, and they are looking at their startup, assessing it, reporting out like the health of the company. I have never seen an investor ask a founder if they'd want to opt in to a founder reporting where the people closest in that founder's life, whether it be their spouse or their core friend group or their family, or their two or three most senior hires, reporting in, how is this founder doing, like personally. um, and I think that could be really powerful information to recount, as a founder is thinking about their business and where they want the business to be. Like, not enough thought, eh, and very few outside influences are going to nudge the founder to bring us like the same level of intention and thoughtfulness and intensity to who do I want to be and how am I tracking towards that? And are there any like places in my life that are in the red currently, as articulated by these people, that I can start to go to work with, and start to redeem and heal up even myself, knowing that like there's every quarter by quarter is building to an outcome. And like this process of formation and becoming is daily. How I spend my hours is forming me. If I'm choosing another hour on email versus an hour exercising, or an hour seated at a table sharing a meal with someone that I love who could care less how much money I raised for the second fund, all of those are decisions that like eventually add up, you know. Um, And so I think that there's so much yet to be done as it comes to boards and the structure of reporting. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents, and an idea that we might pilot soon.
I mean, I love that quote, like, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I think it would be super enlightening to get that full 360-degree view of the founder journey, from multiple perspectives. And I'm surprised we've made it this far into the conversation without even speaking the words like artificial intelligence, but it feels like the like collection and summarization of that content could be made a lot more like doable through some sort of like an AI tool. Because, well, we often see founders struggling with even just like the most basic level of board reporting. But doing some kind of a 360-degree like qualitative evaluation of the founder's overall well-being would be it would be a lot, but I could see it really aligning really well with what your goals are as a partner. So it's a very interesting idea. I'd be super curious to see what kind of insights you were able to pull from being able to get that intel.
One other thought I'd love to share, and I'd open up feedback from whoever listens to this or watches this, is the idea for a CEO time capsule where, everything starts and ends with founder and business outcomes at 11 Tribes and wanting to fight with the teams for both. And inevitably, there will be companies that do not exit in our portfolio. At the same time, I would love to be able to give the founders something that is dignifying and um, sort of a token of remembrance for all that just went into however long of a journey they just had building their company. And for teams who would be interested in um, recording a video, the night before a board meeting where they have, however much time they want, talking about a business update and then a personal update of what has happened in the company and in their own life since the previous quarter or whenever they would have filmed. It would be amazing to have that footage and to store it away, to then create for the investors who never touch and for that team to just have at the end of their journey, where they're able to see, wow, so much has happened since, we incorporated the company to when we exited. And I had a founder friend share with me something shared by one of his mentors. And he said, you know, friend, what happens in the time that between you starting a company and you exiting your company? And my friend responded saying, you grow your team and you bring on customers and you create a product that delights people. And the mentor said, yes, that's all true. But what really happens is life. He's like, I had 2 children in this time. My wife came down with this illness in this time. I bought a house. Like all of this happens. And that idea hit me so hard and thinking like, wow, even if the one thing, the company becomes the only thing in someone's life, like life is still unfolding around them. And so to wake up and realize, oh my gosh, my niece is 6 years old and I've spent no time with her. Or, some of those other moments, it's like, that's scary. Can we fight to work against some of that? And to manage to be present, even amidst just the craziness of building a company. Um, I think the CEO time capsule, that idea of like interstellar style, watching videos back could be interesting.
Yeah, I love the time capsule idea. And I, as you're talking through this, one thing that came to mind for me was, I know this would not be why you're doing it at all, but actually see some real business benefits to giving founders more space and capacity to do that self-reflection, because the whole process of like documenting the founder journey is such, it's just content that people really resonate with and want to consume. And I'm sure you've seen on LinkedIn, like founders who are documenting their journeys as they go along, and their personal reflections and all these kinds of things that can really like build you an audience of fans and supporters. And it can become it can create a really powerful flywheel. I've been trying to write more consistently on LinkedIn and just share how we're building the business at Air CFO, and also like, reflecting on my first year as the CEO and all of these sorts of things. And so there's been just like a really incredible set of feedback to that. People sending me cold DMs saying like, hey, just really appreciate what you wrote about X, Y, and Z, and keep going, and that kind of thing. And I think it's been a really gratifying exercise in and of itself, but it's also, I think, like helping Air CFO as a business, just like putting our story out there in front of more people. And so there's a lot of benefits to it. And so it's not like this is something that you need to sink a couple of hours into that you could spend building your business. It's like, this is something that is going to help you personally and is also going to help you achieve your business goals at the end of the day.
Agreed.
Well, we're way over on time, and I appreciate you so much being generous with your time here, as we're coming up to the end of the Friday. I'd love to end with a question about misconceptions that you see within the VC ecosystem. So, if you were to put up a billboard that would be seen by thousands of founders, and the goal was to dispel one of the biggest illusions about the VC startup space that you'd like to see changed, what would that billboard say?
Probably you're worth more than your company.
Hmm.
I think there could be another version that says, don't take investors' word as gospel. Or another says, there's no such thing as working too hard, but everyone's chronically under-rested. Take Sabbath seriously. um,
Those are all really good options.
yeah, there's so much. The list goes on. But this idea of like, okay, build rhythms of rest, and burnout is a killer. Like, gosh, if people are not serious about that, they will get swept up in the current of building and wake up at some point down the road, asking some existential questions of who the heck am I? What the heck am I doing? And how did I get here?
Yeah. The journey is the reward at the end of the day,
Yes.
right? If
Yes.
you even if you get to where you're going, but you didn't enjoy the journey, you're leaving a lot of fulfillment on the table. So yeah, I think that's a really good message to share with founders who are always forward looking by nature. Just taking the time to take a beat and experience whatever's right in front of them. Yeah, I really like that perspective. Well, I feel like we could probably just talk for like a couple more hours, but I want to. I'm sure you have a couple of things to wrap up before you start your Easter weekend. So I think that's a really great place to leave it for round one of this discussion. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, Kristina. It was really awesome to talk to you, and congratulations again on the announcement of the new fund. I am super excited to see the companies that you invest in with that fresh capital, and um, just, yeah, follow along with the journey as you take a run at reforming the venture capital industry, and helping to build more sustainable, um, well-centered startups and founders. It's a mission that really resonates with us at Air CFO, and so, yeah, I mean, really glad that we were able to be introduced, and hope we can collaborate on some more stuff along these lines down the line as well.
Alex, thank you so much. This was a gift to be here and also to, have a front row seat to all that's unfolding at Air CFO and how you're building. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the journey, and I'm really excited for everything that we have coming down the pipe in the rest of 2025. And yeah, so would love to check in at some point as you
Yes.
start on the new phase of building 11 tribes with Fund 2.
Amazing. Will do.
Thanks.